Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth day of ST4. Jyotirmay will continue with his lectures on entanglement entropy with his fourth lecture. Jyotirmay, please start.
Okay, thanks. In the last lecture, we have seen that Rene entropy or the entanglement entropy can be expressed in terms of the partition function on, on branched sphere. And we explicitly evaluated the partition function of a conformal scalar on branch sphere in 2 dimension. And we collected the log of the UV divergent piece, which is basically the universal contribution of the Rene entropy or the entanglement entropy. And therefore we got the results. Later, we generalized it in arbitrary dimension by mapping it on a branch sphere in arbitrary dimension. We started out with an action which is given by this. Can you see? I mean, my screen is somehow.
Yeah, you can. I can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we had started with the action which is given by this. Sorry, given by this. This is while invariant action of a conformal scalar in d dimension, where zeta and the curvature is given by this because r is positive because we are in SD. Therefore, we got a massive scalar where the mass is coming from the curvature coupling, and therefore we got the partition function. And using the similar prescription we developed for 2 dimension, we evaluated the partition function in arbitrary dimension. And we got the entanglement entropy or the Rene entropy using the formula SQ as a function of the log of ZQ. In the second half of the lecture, we introduced conformal mapping of a flat space onto a hyperbolic cylinder. Basically, we established the fact that flat space metric is while equivalent to a metric on hyperbolic cylinder, which is ADSD times S1, ADSD minus 1 times S1. And the metric is given by this d tau v squared, and this is a metric on hyperbolic, the ADSD part, ADSD minus 1 part. Where tau e has a periodicity, or because we know S1 has a periodicity with a 2 pi r cube. Therefore, we identify tau e, the Euclidean time direction, with tau e plus 2 pi r cube. And you can think it as in terms of some thermal partition function, because we know the periodicity in the Euclidean time direction is related with the inverse temperature of the space. Therefore, this is indeed a thermal partition function on hyperbolic cylinder. To establish this fact, while invariance of a flat space with a hyperbolic cylinder, we used the following transformation, where r is the radius of the entangling surface, and omega is some complex coordinate we have introduced. So basically, we had mapped flat space onto a hyperbolic cylinder by using something called conformal mapping or conformal transformation, which is given by this. So now our task is to evaluate the partition function on the hyperbolic cylinder, which is the space of ADSD minus 1 times S1, where the radius of S1 has 2 pi q. Great. So now let me start by evaluating the partition function of a conformal scalar on a hyperbolic cylinder. So we start with the same action because it's while invariant, dx root g del mu phi, sorry, phi del mu phi as again zeta r phi squared. Now you note that since S1 is a flat direction, you don't have a curvature along that direction. Therefore, you get the curvature only in the direction of the ADS, which is a negative constant negative curvature, which is given by this. And zeta is d minus 2 pi, 4 times d minus 1. Therefore, we end up getting a massive scalar with a mass given by. Note that the mass entirely is coming from the curvature coupling. So now you again do it by, you introduce integration by parts and obtain a partition function which would look like dy exponential of minus s 1 over square root of determinant of box spin zero box with a mass. Note that this box is a scalar Laplacian on S1 times ADSD, ADSD minus 1. Therefore, this box can be decomposed into the Laplacian along the S1 direction as well as the Laplacian along the ADSD minus 1 direction. Okay. So therefore, you write the free energy or the log of the partition function by minus half log of determinant of square minus del 0 plus m0 squared. Now again, by using log of determinant is trace of log of the operator. Sorry. Okay. Now remember that we have a periodicity along the S1 direction. So therefore you can write the wave function psi of tau xi, where I is the direction along the ADSD, as in over q tau psi, sorry, another function phi at xi. Now, if you give a transformation tau goes to tau plus 2 pi q, you can see you get back, to the same wave function. So which indicates that you have a periodicity along the S1 direction. Therefore, if you operate a del tau squared on psi, you get eigenvalue minus n squared over q squared. Okay. So to evaluate the partition function on S1 times ADSD, you would need the eigenvalue and the degeneracy, so-called degeneracy, on S1 as well as on ADSD, right? Again, I'll take the eigenvalue equation as data from the paper Camporesi and Higuchi in 94. Okay, I'll post this paper in the Slack group if you want. And the eigenvalue equation is given by Xi, where lambda runs from 0 to infinity. Okay. So you can think in terms of the free wave expansion. So suppose we are in a flat space, therefore the psi, when the Laplacian hits on psi, you get a k squared. Similarly, you get a lambda squared, but there is some shift in the lambda because we are in ADS. Now we plug those data, these things into the expression of the partition function. ZQ half trace of log squared 0 squared of. Now trace is on the S1 as well as on ADSD now. So therefore you would get a sum over n because of the trace along the S1 running from minus infinity to infinity, and you'll get a degeneracy factor. Degeneracy comes in the compact spaces like SD and so on, but in ADSD it's an open space. Therefore, you can also notice the eigenvalues are like continuous. It takes continuous values. It's not discrete. So therefore you get a corresponding degeneracy factor, or sometimes it is called the Plancherel measure, or the density of states on ADSD. So this is the Plancherel measure on ADSD, and log of, because I use the log, eigenvalue of the log, n squared by q squared plus, you substitute del 0, lambda squared plus d minus 2 whole squared by 4, and a mass term. You remember the mass is given by d minus 2 whole squared by 4. This 4. you can notice that this term from the eigenvalue precisely cancels the mass term. Lambda squared. Okay, is it clear? Okay, great. So now in the last lecture, we have evaluated the log by using the identity log of y 0 to infinity d tau by tau exponential of minus tau minus exponential of minus y tau. Again, you use that identity here and evaluate the partition function. I'm not going to do the same steps again because this is the same steps again. So you can try to do it if you want, and try to establish the fact that the log of the partition function, or the universal part of the partition function is the same for sphere as well as on the S1 times ADST. But here you would require the expression of the Plancherel measure to perform the integral in lambda, which is given by, let me give it, minus 1 divided by minus 2 times pi to the power t minus 1 by 2 comma squared. Okay, but let me just try to justify the expression of the Plancherel measure by some analogy in R3, what we know in R3. So in R3, you know the density of states can be calculated by some d cubed k over 2 pi over L whole cubed, right? Which is proportional to the volume of R3, because L cube goes up steps and you have a k square dk, right? It is similar kind of thing. So at d equals to 3, you can see this product becomes unity, and you get a term proportional to the volume of ADS and a lambda squared. Okay, great. So let me just write down. Okay, let me just write down the steps you would need to perform to obtain the partition function. You replace log y by infinity d tau over tau minus y tau. Then you sum over Kaluza-Klein modes or the constant modes along the S1 by Hubbard-Stratton-Wich trick, which I introduced yesterday. Trick. Perform the integral over lambda over lambda, and finally take the universal contribution. Finally take universal contribution, because that's what we want in the expression of the Raynaud entropy or the internal entropy. Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, means one question. It's not like technical thing. So here you are like computing the partition function directly in ADS d-1, right?
Correct.
You're not using holography to find.
No. It's not holographic thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And because we have coupled the conformal scalar on a background of S1 times ADST. I mean, it's not ADS safety mapping. The background is itself.
Okay, I see.
Okay. So because we have mapped the flat space onto that space.
Means what I was thinking means this I didn't know, since ADS d-1 process one will not have like a safety. I was thinking like using this, whether one can prove ADS CFT like for arbitrary dimension, since you are doing this calculation in arbitrary dimension. But yeah, means that's not the boundary. Okay.
Okay. Great. Then now I want to do the Maxwell thing, free Maxwell field. So the action is well known. In 4 dimension, of course, in 4 dimension. I'll explain why. So you compute the stress tensor T mu nu root G del S del G mu nu. What you'll get is F mu lambda F nu lambda minus G mu nu by 4 F alpha beta F alpha beta. Please check it. And the trace will be F mu lambda minus D by 4 again F squared. So therefore you can see the stress tensor becomes stressless only in 4 dimension. And the theory is while invariant only in 4 dimension. So therefore we start, vanishes only in 4 dimension. So therefore we start with while invariant action, which is only in 4 dimension of a Maxwell field. So therefore what we need to compute is the partition function of Maxwell field on Bransfeld in 4 dimension and S1 times it is 3. These are the 2 conformally equivalent spaces. Okay. So to obtain the partition function, one needs to introduce the gauge fixing and the gauge transformation, because we know the action is gauge invariant under the following gauge transformation. So A mu plus del mu epsilon. Now I introduce a gauge fixing method to evaluate the partition function in the following way. So let me first give the steps. Okay. First, you decompose the field in transverse and longitudinal mode. Part. So I write A mu as A mu transverse or A mu perpendicular plus del mu phi, where phi is the longitudinal mode. Okay. And the transverse part satisfies the transverse gauge condition. So transverse gauge condition, which is given by del mu A mu perpendicular is 0. So you note that when you plug this decomposition into the action itself, you will not get a term in terms of phi, because in the action you don't get a phi term, the longitudinal mode. Therefore in the equation of motion you don't have a equation of motion corresponding to the longitudinal part. Therefore the transverse part only propagates. That's the idea. So okay, so if you can just check it just by plugging it in the action itself. Now the next step, observe how transverse and longitudinal part transforms under the gauge transformation individually. Okay, the gauge transformation we have given is mu goes to mu plus del mu epsilon. Okay. And we have decomposed mu by mu perp plus del mu phi. And since mu perp, the transverse part, satisfies the transverse gauge condition, it is the gauge invariant component. Therefore, it doesn't transform under the gauge transformation. So only the phi transforms under the gauge transformation by phi plus epsilon, and mu perp remains the same. Okay. You just use this decomposition here and just identify. You just what you do is write mu perp plus del mu phi, and similarly on the right hand side. So mu perp plus del mu phi, and I just include the epsilon. Therefore, mu perp remains invariant and phi goes to phi plus epsilon. Okay, great. Now you see how the action can be written in terms of the decomposed field variables, f mu, f mu. You can write it del mu nu minus del mu mu minus del mu mu, right? Now you just use the decomposition here. Del mu nu perp plus del mu phi minus mu perp plus del mu phi the whole squared. Now you can see that del nu commuted acting on a scalar is 0. So therefore you just cancel that one. So what you have, that del mu perp minus del mu perp the whole squared. So you can you just open it up. So you have del mu perp minus del mu perp the first term is this is same as this multiplied with this one. You can see it is just exchange of the mu index. So 2 times, because those 2 terms are the same. But similarly, the cross term, which is this multiplied with this, is same as this multiplied with this, the cross term. It is just same as, I mean, the mu exchange. Mu perp. Okay. Now you, in the action, you have a integration over root GD4x. So therefore you can use integration by parts to simplify this term. So 2 outside becomes, now you use integration by parts to move this here, this Laplacian. Therefore you get a minus sign outside, nu perp. Del mu is the spin 1 Laplacian on S4, nu perp, and you again move it here. So you get a plus sign here. Nu perp del nu mu perp here. Okay. Now I'll use the fact that the commutation relation of the del mu and the del nu operator. So you have a vector, let's say a lambda. You can write it down as r lambda rho mu arrow. Correct. Use this identity to interchange this del nu operator. So what you would do is basically del nu minus del mu acting on a lambda equals to the right hand side. So you replace del mu by del mu plus the right hand side. Okay. D4x plus you replace a nu perp. So del mu will be replaced by del mu plus, let me make it upstairs, nu plus r mu lambda mu nu acting on a lambda. Yeah, here the bracket is here, sorry, here, and this is a mu per pair. Now remember, you have a transverse gauge condition which fixes that del mu a mu perp is 0. Therefore, you drop this term by the transverse gauge condition. And finally, you get perp plus a nu perp. Now you remember r mu is first and third indices are contracted. Therefore, it's r lambda nu. And r lambda nu is basically r by 3 g lambda nu. So r lambda nu, r by d minus 1 in general, but we are in 4 dimension, therefore, oh, r by 4 actually, r by 4, r by d in general, 4 g lambda nu. And r is 12 because r is in 4 dimension, you have a d into d minus 1. Any question?
Akhil has a question.
Yeah, go.
How is our gauge condition different from the usual Lorentz gauge condition?
Sorry?
How is our gauge condition different from the Lorentz gauge condition?
How is this gauge condition? Sorry, again, I didn't get.
How is this different from the Lorentz gauge condition?
This is the Lorentz gauge itself, but there you impose del mu a mu. Del mu mu equals to 0, but here I have decomposed it already in the transverse part and the longitudinal part. This is indeed the Lorentz gauge, but okay. I mean, I because I wanted to see all the components, how they behave under the gauge transform. This is quite explicit. I mean, in terms of the longitudinal mode and the transverse mode.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Therefore, you can see you get a Laplacian on spin 1 Laplacian on S4, as well as some mass term which is coming from the curvature coupling. So if you now integrate out the a mu as to obtain the partition function, you have to integrate out the a mu exponential of minus s. So if this is perfectly Gaussian in a mu, so you can get just simple 1 over square root of determinant of box 1 plus 3. But you remember that we have decomposed the field variables a mu into a mu perp plus del mu phi. So you have to take into account the change in measure because you have changed the variables. I mean, you have decomposed the field variables. So you have to take into account of the change in measure. So now I'll do the change in measure. So this action, integrating out this action, because I have to write dmu in terms of dmu perp and d phi, right? So let me do the change in measure part. Measure. So you start with a normalization condition, which is dmu exponential of minus half d4x root g mu equals to 1 unity, and you want to see how what is the Jacobian or the change in measure when you decompose the field variables into the transverse part and the longitudinal part. And now you write mu in terms of the transverse as well as in the longitudinal. So you write mu.
Sorry, isn't our measure such that the free electromagnetic action is 1?
Sorry,
isn't the measure default measure which fixes the Maxwell partition function to 1?
No, you have to, because I mean, when you integrate, why it comes is because you have to integrate out in terms of the dA part, because you have action in terms of a part, right? So when you integrate in the expression of the partition function, you have to have dA part exponential minus s, but you have a dA, right? How would you integrate out? So you have to consider what is the Jacobian when you change.
Yes, but I'm saying isn't the measure of a mu defined such that the partition function of the Maxwell action goes to 1? Isn't that, I thought that's how you, I mean.
So you are asking the first step.
Yeah, I'm asking the first step. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah. That you have to start. I mean, you have to start with a normalization condition, so that, I mean, how would you I mean, compare to I mean, change of variables. You have a standard integral, and then you change what I mean, what is the corresponding Jacobian with respect to that
Yes,
integral?
yes, that part is fine. I'm just asking the starting part kind of is new to me, because I always thought
Okay,
the
you can
measure is defined, whatever we do, the original path integral with this measure defined by saying the partition function for the free Maxwell action should go to 1. Isn't that?
No. You were asking e to the power minus half f mu f mu.
Yeah.
No, I guess it is mu.
At least when we do usual field theory calculation, we say
That
the
is the
measure is
definition of the
defined
partition
by
function.
measure
That
is
is not the
fixed.
measure. I mean, that is the definition of the partition function.
Yes. So the setting the partition function of the free theory to 1 gives a definition for the measure, right?
Is it? I knew it. I knew it. It comes from mu part.
So if you define your measure like this measure is not even gauge invariant, right?
Correct. I mean, this measure is not gauge invariant. True. I mean the measure. I mean, I'm not. I mean, this tape is not gauge invariant, of course. But I mean the exponent. I mean what I write in the exponent is not gauge invariant. But I'm thinking that if you have a mu in the original field variables, when you decompose it, how the measure changes.
Okay, thanks.
Ritabhrata, please go ahead.
Yeah, so when you determine the action, like earlier the Maxwell action, where it was like mu del nu plus nu times 3. What?
Correct.
So that seems like kind of a mass term.
Correct.
But since it's a free Maxwell field, it should be massless, right? So
massless in the flat space. In the flat space. But when you couple it to a background, the mass comes from the curvature. Similarly, what you have seen in the free scalar as well. When you have a free scalar action in the flat space, you just write del mu phi, partial del mu phi, partial del mu phi.
So it's like a photon moving in a medium kind of.
Yeah, correct.
Can you just clarify that comment? I'm still confused.
Okay,
I thought curve space Maxwell Lagrangian still has only 2 degrees of freedom, and it can't have a mass and so on.
It has a 2 degrees of freedom, because I mean you impose del mu equals to 0 again, and there is a on-shell masslessness. The masslessness condition is the on-shellness, right? So on-shell massless condition in the flat space is like box mu equals to 0. On-shell condition. Then you get a k squared equals 0.
Our action is still f mu, right? There is no curvature coupling.
Correct. Yeah, action is root GD for x. I mean, curvature coupling. I mean, here the
sure up to, it's minimally coupled, right? There's no
correct.
extra. Okay.
Correct. That's true. Okay. Therefore, now you look at the mu per plus del mu phi whole squared. This term. Phi you would write as mu per plus the cross term del mu phi, and there is the term del mu phi. Now you have an integration outside, right? So you can change by one integration by parts and move it the del mu here, and use the transverse gauge condition that del mu per is 0. Therefore you drop that term. So ultimately what you have in the exponent is mu per plus, so in the exponent you have mu per plus del mu phi, which after one integration by parts you can move spin 0 Laplacian on S4, right? Therefore, when you integrate mu as well as d phi, what you get Jacobian. The first one mu part doesn't give you anything determinant, but the second d phi integral will give you 1 over square root of determinant of spin 0 Laplacian. Therefore, Jacobian is determinant of. Okay. So now you integrate the mu part in the action, because to evaluate the partition function, you write this, and this will give you the first, this integration will give you a determinant 3, and the numerator you will get this Jacobian, the change in measure. So therefore the partition function on the branch sphere, you get determinant of spin 0 Laplacian on sphere S4 divided by spin 1 Laplacian. Yeah, this is the final.
Well, then the partition function definition, it will be d of a mu only, right?
In the starting point, you have d mu. Then you have, when you decompose the variable, you introduce, like you have a d mu.
No,
you
just
replace
earlier.
You replace.
This I understood.
Yeah.
In the earlier expression, just can you go a little bit up?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Z equals to d a mu. So this should be d a mu e to the minus.
Correct. D mu. Correct. You start with that. Correct. Okay. Any comment? Question? Okay. Great. So we have got the expression of the partition function. Now to get log of partition function, because what we need is the Rayleigh entropy or the entanglement entropy, you'd get half log of determinant of spin 0 Laplacian.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So this del 1 plus 3, can you write it in terms of del 0?
Del 0?
Yeah.
No, because I mean the Laplacian you get, I mean when you have like del nu acting on a mu, this is a spin 1 Laplacian. It's not usual scalar Laplacian. Correct? Because it's acting on a vector. So I mean the better way of saying is that, so you write del nu mu as partial plus the Christoffel connection, then you again hit another del nu. It is not usual scalar.
No, what I'm trying to say is, it seems like the determinant del 1 plus 3 is roughly keeping track of 3 degrees of freedom, right?
3 degrees of freedom.
As in, I'm just asking, how many degrees of freedom are there?
You still have a 2.
APERP
has a 2, because I mean it's a usual check, right? So this is 1, right?
Yeah.
And how you have a polarization, let's say epsilon mu perp, which you write, if you transform, let's say if you transform epsilon mu perp with say this one, this doesn't change your on-shellness condition. How? Because if you dot with k mu with epsilon and k dot epsilon, it will go k as epsilon plus del mu in Fourier space becomes k, so you get k squared. So k squared equals to 0 by on-shellness. So you can still, after fixing the del mu perp equals to 0, you can still choose, you can still transform, transform epsilon mu, the polarization, by del mu zeta, so that by on-shellness you can remove 1 degree of freedom again.
Right. So what?
So the original question was, okay, go on.
Maybe could you comment, like, how would this denominator have changed if it was like a massive vector to begin with?
If it is a massive vector to begin with, the mass term would change.
So now you are this is what I'm confused about. Like the denominator kind of is keeping track of 3 components of the vector field, right? And you're saying because the spin 1 Lagrangian of the massless vector knows about the on-shellness, 1 degree of freedom is lost from that part, and that 1 degree of freedom is subtracted explicitly with the numerator.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
But you seem to say that but if you're starting with vector with a massive vector, all you seem to say is that the 3 changes to some 3 plus m.
Correct. And
so I'm confused. I'm confused by that 1 parameter changing really.
I mean, you can't just look at the determinant and say what are the degrees of freedom, because in that case you have a epsilon mu goes to epsilon mu plus del mu zeta, doesn't give you the on-shellness condition. Correct?
So exactly when this 3 is 3, you have only 2 degrees of freedom in the denominator.
One second. Let me not comment on that. That mass term will change, because if you introduce the mass term like in this fashion, m square mu, that will change everything. Let me see. M squared, it will again you break as del mu phi whole square. So you get a mass corresponding to the transverse mode, correct? And a kinetic term corresponding to the longitudinal mode, correct? Therefore, you have to work it out to get the partition function. I shouldn't. I said it wrong. That
so my confusion is like if you change the mass of the scalar, then also the subtraction will be just del 0 plus the mass square or something, the numerator. But the denominator may like it's kind of confusing to me to say that changing one parameter.
I'm just want to ask you how are you? I mean, seeing that by looking at seeing the degrees of freedom by looking at the partition function.
So I would say degrees. If I had like so I'm just naively thinking the determinant will get another factor of the.
No, it is not. You can see, I mean, it can be another factor in the mass. Of course, the mass will change, but it will also introduce another determinant in the numerator or the denominator. I'm not sure in the denominator, because you are integrating out in the action itself. Another denominator of spin 0 with another mass shift. The partition function would look completely different. And how will you count in that case?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, one thing related to the consciousness condition being preserved. So for that, you used k squared equals to 0.
Yeah, that, I mean, in the flat space idea, I mean, here you would get k squared plus the curvature term, because here you are not going to just say del mu hitting on the epsilon mu. You have to hit del nabla mu.
Right. So here consciousness condition preserving means
yeah. Okay. Is it okay now?
I mean it's okay. Means I just was confused that
because
ZQ you didn't need k square equal to 0, right? That's all.
Correct. That's true. I mean, he asked about how the degrees of freedom, and that's why I just clarified.
Yeah, it was related to that only. Means that's why.
Yeah, correct.
Just to add, roughly my confusion is like I see that determinant of minus delta 1 plus 3 is roughly like determinant delta 0 square, because there are 2 degrees of freedom. In the sense like roughly because there are 2 degrees of freedom there.
No. Delta 1 is completely has a different expression. Why would this?
Yeah, I'm saying delta this because there are 2 degrees of photons. Like it should determinant delta 1 plus 3.
Delta 1 acts on mu.
It acts on spin 1 objects. It acts on vectors. Sure.
Yeah, sure.
But like roughly the delta 1 plus 3 should behave like determinant delta 0 square, right? Because there are 2 degrees of freedom.
Oh, okay.
Delta 1 plus 3. But like if you slightly change that 3 or correct the mass for a massive vector, it becomes like determinant delta 0 power 3 and stays there for all masses other than mass 0. So that's why I kind of got confused with the expression. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Great. So therefore, the log partition function would be log of determinant of spin 0 plus log of determinant of the spin 1 with plus 3. Now you use the same trick I introduced in the last lecture. Like you write log of determinant as a trace of log, then just substitute log y by the integral transform and obtain. I'm leaving it as exercise to evaluate the log ZQ explicitly and extract the universal part. Oh, sorry. Universal part. My motivation was to just show how the gauge fixing entire procedure works here. So any comment? I mean, we are towards the end, I guess. Yeah, I have only ADS 3 times S1, which I'm not sure I'll be able to complete, but I'll sketch it out in the proof. Any comment? Anything we can? I mean, I towards then I'll also discuss what are the open direction one can go for. Okay. So okay, now let me sketch out the hyperbolic cylinder part. The ADS 3 times S1. Okay, first step again is decompose the field variables on S1 as well as on ADS3. So you would write a mu, a tau, and ai, where I is the direction along the ADS3. Okay. Now you decompose the AI, further decompose AI into transverse and longitudinal mode. Here I'll take a different approach to fix the gauge. This is going to be based on temporal gauge. First, I use the Lorentz one. I'll use the temporal one here. You further decompose AI, the direction, the transverse into the transverse mode plus longitudinal mode, till I find. And you impose the transverse gauge condition equals to 0. Okay. Now you see how the transform variables, how the decomposed variables transform under gauge transformation. Okay. Your original action was invariant under mu goes to mu plus del mu epsilon. Therefore, your a tau goes to a tau plus del tau epsilon. And because of the transverse gauge condition, the transverse part doesn't transform under the gauge transformation, and longitudinal mode, gets a shift by constant epsilon. Okay, is this part clear? Now I'll write down the Lagrangian in terms of the decomposed variables. Lagrangian, which was fourth of f mu, you would write as 2 times f tau I. Why? Because fi tau is same as f tau I, and fij, where I and j are the direction along the ADS3. Okay. Now you open it up. Open up f tau I. You'd get term del tau ai perp plus del tau del I phi times del I a tau squared. And this is the first part, yeah. F tau I. And fij be del I aj perp minus del j ai del j upstairs. AI perp whole square. Why the perp survives? Because by the computation relation of, if you decompose AI by AI perp plus del I phi, that phi gets cancelled. So only the transverse part remains. So therefore, in the action, you can see this part is automatically gauge invariant because it consists only the transverse component, but this part is not because you have a tau. So therefore, you have to fix the gauge, and one of the gauge choice can be a tau equals to 0. A tau equals to 0. And you used the transverse gauge condition. Now you know that a tau transforms under the gauge transformation del tau epsilon. Therefore, you would have a Faddeev-Popov determinant corresponding to the a tau. So the FP determinant would be the determinant of, because eta goes to eta plus delta epsilon, the Fadipova procedure which you learned will give determinant of del tau. Yeah, this is the Fadipova determinant. Okay. Okay. Now, so in the action, you have substituted a tau equals to 0 by gauge condition. I mean the gauge choice you have made. Now you have only the del I aj perp minus del j I, and after substituting a tau equals to 0, this term drops out, and this term, the first two term. So therefore, the action, the second term, the T2, which is Fij, or del I aj perp minus del j I, you open it up again, you would get 2 times, because I mean there are 2 terms which are identical by indices. So aj perp spin 1 Laplacian on ADS3, this is on ADS3, minus 2 aj perp. Okay.
Excuse me. Hello.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So the fact that you have to fix this extra gauge condition that a tau equals to 0.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the consequence of the fact that you took epsilon dependent only on the tau coordinate kind of investment coordinate?
No. I mean here the mu goes to mu plus del mu epsilon. That is the general gauge transformation. The gauge,
right.
Yeah. Now you see how the individual component transforms. So a tau is a tau plus del tau epsilon that transforms. Yeah. If AI part, the perpendicular or the transverse part on the ADS3 doesn't transform because it is the gauge invariant component because it satisfies the transverse gauge condition. Therefore, the longitudinal part gets shifted by 5 plus epsilon. It's similar.
But like in case of when you are doing, say, for sphere, this is not true.
This is not true. No, I mean, if you, in that case, that a tau still gets a, I mean, in that.
Let me rephrase it. Like if you're saying that your the transverse component don't transform under the gauge transformation.
Correct.
It would have been true for the earlier case also, right? When you did the SD.
Correct. But the transverse part here is only along the ADS3. I have decomposed in that way. There, the transverse part was entirely on S4.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I see.
Okay. Yeah. The second term, you would get this, and from the first term, the f tau I part, which is now after substituting a tau equals to 0, you are left with this 2 term del tau ai perp plus del tau del I perp. So that the term is del tau ai. So you have a del tau ai perp plus del I by the whole square. So you would get del tau squared ai perp plus del I phi, but the cross term would vanish by again integration by parts. Del I perp del I phi, you would move it here and use the transverse gauge condition, that will drop out. Therefore you would have del tau squared ai perp and spin 0 Laplacian on ADS3. Okay. Finally, the partition function Z would be a Jacobian factor because we have changed the variables, and determinant of del tau, which comes from the Fadipova part, and this, when you integrate out ai perp and phi, you will get a 1 over determinant of del tau squared times determinant of spin 0 Laplacian to the power half. Correct? Because when you integrate out this thing, now you're still left with the ai perp, the second integration, ai perp. This term will give you give you, let me call it numerator part. I mean, Z1 part, Z1. Let's call it a Z1. Z1, which is Jacobian. It's a Jacobian. Fadipopov, and the T2 integration. The T1 integration would give you the square root of the determinant of this part. And of the square minus box 1 minus 2. Correct. Correct. So you combine this Z1 and Z2. You can see that determinant of Fadipopov gets cancelled with the longitudinal mode integration delta squared. So therefore there is a square root. Therefore this and this gets cancelled, and you have 1 over square root of determinant delta squared minus box 1 minus 2 to the power half times 1 over determinant of box 0 to the power half times the Jacobian. Jacobian is still left. Correct. Okay. Now you calculate the Jacobian again, like dmu, starting with dmu g d4 x mu equals to identity. Now you use the decomposition. mu would be a tau squared plus ai per plus del I phi the whole square. Correct. The first term will give you del a tau squared ai per. The cross term would vanish because of the integration by parts and transverse gauge condition, and del I phi will give you 5 box 05. So therefore, when you integrate in terms of the decomposed field variables, again you get Jacobian, which is determinant of spin zero Laplacian on ADS3. Okay. Now you substitute it back in here. Now you notice that Jacobian is spin zero Laplacian to the power half gets cancelled with this one, integration over the longitudinal mode. And finally, what you get is determinant of delta squared minus spin 1 transverse Laplacian on ADS3 to the power half. This is the partition function on ADS3 times S1. Any question? It might be quite boring. I mean, this just calculation thing. Any comment?
Here, these delta 1 is same as the earlier delta 1.
Correct. Delta squared is the same as that. I mean, when you evaluate the partition function, you replace delta squared by n squared over q squared, because that comes from the S1 periodicity. Correct. Okay. So now again, I'm leaving it as exercise that evaluate log of ZQ on ADS 3 times S1 by the technique I introduced in the last lecture, like just replace the eigenvalue, degeneracy, and integrate using Haber-Stratton trick and so on, and get the universal term. Okay. So I just wanted to ask if any one of you want me to just go through the derivation again, please let me know, because I went it quite quickly, I guess. If any one of you want, because this gauge fixing procedure actually will work for the graviton as well, or the higher spin, if you get the action. And this is quite, I mean, I have adapted it from the paper by Seitlin. I'll refer that. Seitlin, yeah, it's quite old, 80s paper. Yeah, I'll send it in the Slack. They have done it for I mean, general spin on arbitrary curved background. So you have to, I mean, they have done it for the compact spaces like SD or so on. But in terms of ADS 3 times S1 or so on, you have to just decompose the field variables and fix the gauge individually. Okay. Any comments? Any questions? Okay. So I'll conclude here. I mean, I have nothing more to say. I wanted to do the Maxwell at the last, and I completed it, I guess. Not completely, but I got the partition function. Now you use the machineries I have given you to evaluate the partition function. Okay, so let me just summarize. What have you learned? So we started up with the definition of entanglement entropy, Rene entropy. We evaluated for QFT in 4-dimension scalar field. We introduced replica trick and conformal mapping on transfer as well as on S1 times ADST. Okay, and therefore we evaluated the partition function on transfer ADS T minus 1 times S1 to get the expression of the Rene entropy. And therefore the entanglement entropy. Universal part. Okay. So there are some open direction one can go for. So for example, the one we introduced the lattice method for scalar, that hasn't been generalized it for arbitrary spin in higher dimension spinness in D, even for D equals 4, and generalization. Also, one has to check the conformal mapping procedure. For other conformal fields, like the known ones are P forms where P is D by 2 minus 1. These are conformal fields. Maxwell in 4-dimension, conformal scalar arbitrary T, conformal fermion or the Dirac fermion, conformal fermion arbitrary T. These are the results which are known, but one can go for other conformal fields if you or the while invariant action if you can find. Okay, so let me stop it here. Any question, comments, anything?
One like slightly. So the technique that you showed, it seems like pretty general. Like so, for D equal to force a Maxwell equation for arbitrary spacetime, this thing seems it can be done.
It can be done, but whether it will give you Rene entropy or entanglement entropy, that's the question. Because the conformal mapping actually maps the conformal field from flat space onto that transfer or hyperbolic cylinder. So you have to go only for the conformal fields.
Yeah. That I understand. That's why I said just say take Maxwell at d equal to 4, which like Grant is
correct.
So that's what I was thinking. That means has any work been done or being done kind of in like a generalized direction? Like for that, when you determine the curvature mass, there you just use that it was on a sphere and you took R kind of.
The constant curvature background.
Okay, I see. So you're saying that to get the Renyi entropy, you have to map it to a sphere.
Yeah,
a branch sphere.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we are evaluating the Renyi entropy or entanglement entropy for a flat space, but the flat space is being mapped on those using conformal mapping. So the fields have to be the conformal invariant. Otherwise, this conformal, the while invariance of the metric will not go through the d squared mapping.
I see. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So could you comment on some cases where it has been done for like non-conformal cases?
Non-conformal cases, you can evaluate the partition function, but it will not give the Renyi entropy or the entanglement. As I've just said, that Ritabruta asked me that question. Okay.
No, I mean like where it has been evaluated on the SQ itself.
For any non-conformal cases?
Yeah.
So I'll post references. I mean, yeah. So it has been done by Cyclin around 2017. Few examples. I'll post some references. Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good. I can see one raised hand.
Yeah. So like yesterday, you also said from your today's calculation, it's quite true that when you calculate the partition function on branch sphere and here in ADS-D-1 cross S1, so there is this in the numerator, this determinant is missing. So
yeah,
like
correct.
You said, like this,
correct. I remember the last discussion.
Yeah, the H mode contribution is not there.
Correct.
So I mean, from the very starting on this ADS 3 cross S1, we are doing quite right? I mean, where are we going on or where were we going on wrong?
No, we are not
is
going
there any
wrong.
physical insight to that why we are not?
Actually, what I think I can give you my perspective where why we are not getting the same. It can be from the measure, because you see when you give the action is while invariant, right? So when you write the partition function, the DMU for the S4 and ADS3, there should be something change in measure or something, because the action remains same. How can it not be the same, right? So the only point could be the measure. So therefore the partition function turns out to be different. But one has to show, this is just some words. One has to show it completely.
I mean, the definition of measure you used is like not invariant under this conformal mapping, right?
Correct.
That's pretty much
True.
clear.
Correct. Because the action is the while invariant, as you just mentioned correctly. And the action is same in both spaces. So where else can it be? So you have to.
No, but do you
calculate the?
Sorry, go on, Sir.
Yeah. So one has to calculate the measure carefully and show that why there is a difference in S4 and ADS3 times S1. For the higher spin, for the higher spin, the scalar is exact. There is exact match in scalar. For spin 1, you see, or spin 1 and the Maxwell, you have a edge modes. Edge modes means the numerator determinant is missing in ADS3 times S1.
Yeah, so can we calculate this missing part also?
That hasn't been done.
Yesterday,
that hasn't been done. If you can do it, that would be great.
So, I'm wondering, if we can relate this thing to this endpoint contributions people are doing these days to this modular Hamiltonian stuff.
Yeah, if you can track if you can track the under the while transformation, how the measure changes. That is the question. If you want to pose the question, because we are using the while invariance, right? While mapping or conformal mapping, you have to see how the measure changes under the while transformation. That would be the question.
I see.
Yeah. I can see one more raised hand. Yeah.
Nihal.
Yeah, hi. The whole setup that you have built, it is based on the Hilbert space being a bipartite Hilbert space and on pure
Correct.
pure fields, right?
Correct.
Is there any generalization of it, or what does entanglement entropy mean when you have
for multipartite systems or something?
Multipartite
Yeah,
systems?
there are some papers. I mean, I haven't followed closely, but there are some papers. But I am not sure whether that has been done for field theory cases. So, I mean, it could be quite well known for the quantum mechanics perspective, but for the field theory perspective, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Akhil has a question.
So something related. So like usually when these people who study gravity say that when you do this, you can't really think of the gravity Hilbert space as factorizing and so on, right? So is there a similar statement on higher spin things, or like is it clear that you can do that
Sorry,
calculation?
Akhil, could you please repeat? I couldn't hear you.
So I'm saying at least when you're in the gravity calculations, people like Subrat and all would say that you are not, it's not legitimate to think of it as a bipartite system. Yeah, so I'm just asking is it clear that in the higher spin cases you're referring to, at least for P-form stuff, not symmetric things, there it's all right to do that?
Hello.
Hi, was I audible or not?
No, I mean, I couldn't hear you.
I'm just asking, is the factorization an issue in any of these higher spin calculations you're referring to?
Oh, okay. So for the graviton, they would say, of course, the factorization of the Hilbert space doesn't make any sense. But if we are not doing the complete, I mean, if you want to do for the graviton, you have to take the linearized graviton on this background. So you fluctuate g mu nu by h mu nu plus some background. And I'm not sure whether the factorization of the Hilbert space, of course, that is a problem. But there are some references where the graviton, entanglement of the graviton has been computed, okay, for the linearized graviton. Cassini Huerta had done it in 2019 on a sphere by using the radial quantization that I introduced in the first lecture. And we did it on this massive graviton on ADS 3 times S1. So, and yeah, so, I mean, of course, I mean, there is a question of the Hilbert space, factorization of the Hilbert space, but yeah, that's a controversial topic. I shouldn't comment on it.
What about higher spin things? Like you were mentioning many higher spin calculations, right? So
Higher
is it
spin,
clear
I mean,
that there it factors and so on?
Yeah, when I say the higher spin thing, I mean, you can of course calculate the partition function, right? Then whether it will mean the entanglement entropy or Rene entropy, that's a separate question, right? So you can of course calculate the partition function and just stay and think where is the connection with entanglement entropy and Rene entropy in the higher spin cases. Correct?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, or I'll stop it here.
If there are no other questions, then this was Jyotirmoy's last lecture, and let us thank him for this wonderful series of lectures.
Yeah, I should also thank. It's been a nice experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Jyotirmoy.
Yeah, thanks.
Shall we stop recording?
Yeah, and then maybe if someone has questions, can ask.